G'day, guys, and welcome to Warrior by Design. As always, I'm your host, Benjamin John. Now, I've got an epic guest on here today, Syl Sebastian. Now, Syl Sebastian is someone I've come across personally just by doing a little bit of exploration myself and looking into stuff. We've had a little bit of a chat backstory, getting to know each other previously, but I was really intrigued by some of the stuff that I saw on Syl's website and I saw on his Facebook page and everything else. So I wanted to try and make contact and get him on here and have a bit of a chat. Syl is a type of bloke that, his whole life has been dedicated to understanding awareness and most importantly, how to apply this into our life, right? This is something that he's got a real impeccable intent to be able to create for himself and to be able to explore and create this awareness for others as well of how to apply this awareness into our lives. Because to be honest with you guys, as we discussed earlier, as Syl said, awareness is fantastic, but if we can't actually apply that within our lives to be able to create what we want to create, well, then what is awareness? It's just something that we observe, right? So here I have Syl, and thank you so much for being here today, mate. And I really appreciate you accepting my invitation to come on. And I'd love if you tell the guys a little bit about yourself and from your perspective.
Oh, sure. It's really my pleasure being here, Benjamin. It's a great joy. When I see in my Facebook group, for instance, people always say, I want to meet like minds. Yeah, when you do, it's really thrilling. Some other people who are also interested in learning, growing, and application. Because you can sit in theory in the classroom, but as an actual literal warrior, if you don't know how to apply what you've been taught in the classroom, you can read the book on shooting your gun all the time, but until you actually shoot it, it's a very big difference, right? So it's a very simple analogy, but people really see their ass literally when they read a book and go and shoot a gun thinking they know how, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So to me, this is important. And when you take this down to the step of learning and we start to understand, hey, wait a second, I've got all this information in my head, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't really know how to use it. And I start to make that effort. Then our lives change. And this for me is what I'm all about, the application of that. So this is a great journey to be on. It's really fulfilling. And it leads me into all wonderful things. And just, to know a bit more about me, like I was saying, when you're in the battlefield, the big picture determines your actions. All your plans can go out the window, especially the moment you get it in the mouth, as the great philosopher Mike Tyson said, right?
So true.
Yeah, the moment you get it in the mouth, your plans go out the window. So, of course, as a warrior, you train, yes, but you also train to have that adaptability, that appropriateness, that flexibility, that fluidity, so that you can flow with things. And ultimately, it's that bigger picture that you have to adapt to. And for me, I call this attunement, and I live via attunement. In other words, rather than the battle, I see it as life, the world, the universe, everything, right? So it's a very different way of living because I'm not living according to my own internally generated ideas and conceptions and plans. I'm living in response to the greater pressures of the universe. So it's a fun way to live. It's a very unusual way to live. It's not recommended for everybody. Just because it works for me doesn't mean I believe it's going to work for everybody. So absolutely not, but it does. And, this has led me to what I do now, which I run life change and self-change programs. I assist people when they're in crisis or whatever. So I do a lot of things, but mainly it is all under this focus of sharing awareness, sharing tools. I don't tell anybody to do anything, and I don't share any beliefs either. I share self-evident sensibilities. In other words, tools. That's what I do. Any tool is only as good as you know how to use it, right? So, yeah. And tools can be used for a variety of products. So that's what I share. I share tools of living, actual, real, useful tools. Yes, they're abstract, psychological tools, but it doesn't make them any less potent.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing, Syl, and that's and I can resonate with that a lot. I speak obviously from a different perspective, but I have very similar views in the sense that I say to people all the time, if all we can really truly know is that we experience, right? That we actually experience for ourselves. And exactly. in that resilience too, like we talk about, that warrior and whatever, and the adaptability, but there's also something of building a resilience to what you experience, right? And what it gets to a point where you actually understand that for yourself and be able to process that and perceive that and have your own awareness around that, which is so amazing. And
It is.
all these beautiful views that are out there, all these beautiful perspectives that are out there. What is right and wrong? I say it all the time. What is right and wrong? What is perfection?
Yeah.
Is it your perfection?
It's
My
a variable.
perfection?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good point to segue on, right? So perfection was what started my journey at age 10. So I used to have, from the inner tubes of car tires. People don't know what inner tubes are today anymore, but I suspect what
Yep.
the inner tube is. I used to cut them in these strips, I don't know, about 2 feet long, or a little more than half a meter long. I have to get international. I'm still in primitive America over here, where they're using imperial. Anyway, and I used to wrap it around my finger, and I would shoot these, the strip of rubber. And I got to be absolutely 100% accurate. I could shoot the ash off your cigarette. I could put on, on and off a light switch, a fly, anything. Doesn't matter. Any fly, mosquito, they were dead meat. No problem. So I was 100% accurate with this. So one day we had this light bulb hanging in the hallway, in the passageway, and it didn't have a lampshade on, which was quite unusual, by the way. Anyway, that's another long story. So the fly sitting on the light bulb, normally I could pick them off, no problem. And I shoot, and for whatever reason, I don't know if the tail or anything, but the light bulb explodes. Just too beautiful. I don't know if you've ever seen a light bulb explode like that when you strike it. It's really cool to look at. So the light bulb explodes, and I'm upset. Not because I've broken the light bulb. Yes, I was a good kid and I was responsible, and I didn't want to damage and ruin stuff unnecessarily, but I was upset because I'd missed. So my mother comes out and she sees me upset, and she thinks I'm upset because of broken the light bulb. So I tried to explain. I said, no, it's because I actually missed. And she says to me, well, we can't all be perfect. And she didn't say all, she just said, we can't be perfect. And I said, why not? And I knew it was a rhetorical question. My mother, she's my mother, and I knew for her this was simply conformity, conventionalism, the saying, well, you can't be perfect. And she's placating the kid, and off she goes. And I knew my question to me was a very real question. So, okay, I know it's rhetorical for my mother. Off I go to my room and I think about this. I spend the rest of the day thinking about this. Why not? So why can't we be perfect? But the first thing I do is I said, well, in order to determine whether I can be perfect or not, I first have to understand what perfection actually means. Yeah. So then I set about making a whole big study of what perfection is. And this took me a couple of weeks. So now this was, back in the day, I'm originally from South Africa. And, I grew up in the heart of the country. And then I went from a little town, really middle of nowhere, to a medium town to the city. I went from one extreme to the other, in other words. The last 2 years of school, I went to like Beverly Hills 90210. Anyway, this was in the middle town. And so it's still extremely conservative. So I had to be careful. So I go and ask people about perfection. And anytime you ask anything that's outside of the norm, that's kind of unusual, you get that, funny, like, what the hell is up with you? You know this look, right? Anyway, so I had to be really cautious and careful. All right, but I'm the intrepid explorer and I'm a scientist and I doggedly pursue my questions. So I remember still, with one older boy, because, I couldn't ask my peers. They'd be like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so I was asking, I was 10 at the time, but I'm asking like high school students. And so I asked him and he said, well, perfections will just be boring. And then I said, like, kind of in my head, really, I'm trying not to show this, but I'm like, dude, did you hear what he just said? And I said to him, but I really wanted to know this. I earnestly asked him, I said, but then it wouldn't really be perfect, would it, if it's boring? The moment I said that, I could see the wheels turn in his head of the implications. Not only did he realize he'd said something that is inherently self-contradictingly stupid and canceling, but that he'd actually believed it up until the moment that I'd sort of asked the question. And so now he's looking like a right idiot. Anyway, I have to run. Let's just put it that way. So my first lesson in capital D diplomacy, be cautious. But anyway, I persisted and I got all of these people's perceptions. And I realized that most people only had an idea of what perfection is. They didn't actually have any real detailed, concrete understanding or definition. So they just had these vague notions and they sort of wrote it off as, well, it's too difficult, it's impossible, you can't have it, it's boring, blah, blah. Right. So then I said, let me really think about this. Is perfection actually possible? So I did my very first act of actual philosophizing right at the end of all this great big study of mine. And I did many in later years, different studies. Anyway, so I said perfection is a state of being from which, if you had the power to change anything at all, you would not. That was my definition of perfection. If you had the power to change anything at all, you would not, right? So that was my definition of perfection. So in other words, I defined perfection as a variable. Yeah. And it's according to your own ideas. Hey, if I'm, I don't want to change anything. I have the power. I've been granted power by the gods or whatever. I can do anything, but I choose to lie on my couch and watch TV. This is my choice. I have all the choices in the universe open to me. I choose that. It's perfect for me. All right, cool. Yeah. So for me personally, I like variation and surprises and adventure. This is part of my perfection. So this idea of perfection being a boring constant, I just threw that right out there. I said, that wouldn't be perfect for me. That'd be really crappy for me. I'd be bored to death and it would be perfect. So I would like variation. So this is perfection is thus something that we choose and we determine. So that put me on a path to perfection. That's what I called it, my path to perfection, my perfection. So I struggle to say this today because now keep in mind, I'm in completely my own bubble. There's nobody I can talk to about this. None of my peers, teachers, parents, adults, nobody. So I don't know what I'm doing is like, other people think, what the hell are you doing? They wouldn't see the preposterousness of it, but I didn't care. And it was very useful to me. So I go on my merry way in my ignorance, which was fantastic. Ignorance really was bliss and useful because if I had known or felt that pressure from outside, I never would have pursued these lines of inquiry and done these studies and tests. So this path to perfection was just my name for it. Today, it sounds kind of arrogant in a way that, hey, I'm on a path to perfection. So I don't use it anymore. But, I'd rather say I'm on a path to moreness. Change it. But it's still the same thing, essentially. It's what's more for me. And, moreness for you, it's a big part of my philosophy is this concept of moreness. But, it's essentially what moreness is just, hey, what I like, what I enjoy, what's really cool and awesome for me. And there's a bit more to it when we bring in attunement and we start to connect to awareness in the bigger picture. And we start to understand that, hey, the intent of the universe is awareness. Now, I will say this kind of as a fact, and I try not to do that, but hey, it's something that you can just go and test and see for yourself if it works. Assume it to be something, assume it as a hypothesis, go and test it, and it proves itself. So to me, it doesn't really matter, but anyway, at least in my worldview, the entire intent and purpose and meaning of life and everything, it's all about awareness. So when you look at any activity through this lens of awareness, it suddenly starts to make sense. And this is huge. All the participants, and I coach coaches, and when I start to share this with them, it's like, holy shit. All you've got to do is assume and insist that things do make sense. And I call it capital M, capital S makes sense. And, capitalizing things, it's a long story, but we'll get there. So when you assume this, and then in order to get it to make sense, the filter, the key, the translation key is awareness. So say, you know what, I broke up with my girlfriend. Look at it through the context of awareness. Yeah, this sucks. Yeah, well, dude, don't you have to learn how to deal with and be with yourself and learn some independence of being and learn that things are variable and flow and there's change and, you have to maybe learn to be more responsible and you have to grow up and, yeah, lots of learning. Now, suddenly it's a whole different picture, right? I mean, it's this fantastic education. It's like, whoa, if you like learning and particularly if you like awareness, this becomes the most incredible gift, capital G gift that you can possibly imagine. Yes.
Yeah, it definitely. So
this is for me. So this all started from that. So then the next step after this definition of perfection, and to understand on my path, I said, wow, now what? I said, well, how do I get to? Well, I need to at least be more aware, and I always started to pay attention to awareness. Actually, the word awareness. Sometimes I pursued things, and only the words later came to me. Like I have a really powerful story about how I came to impeccability, even before this. But I didn't have the word impeccability in my vocabulary, in my conception. Anyway, so then I started to explore awareness. And I'm looking at awareness. Oh my God, was I horrified at my own lack of awareness, right? So this is back in the day where your corporal punishment was very much a deal, right? So you get in trouble, you get a caning. We called it getting cuts, right? With an actual cane, right? Like a rattan cane. So I don't know if you had corporal punishment when you went to school, but this was very much a real thing, right?
No, my father's day it was, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So So anyway, so I was horrified at how I stayed out of trouble because I from then and even earlier I was very strategic. I was always had this just innately the strategy. So I at least had enough sense to be a little bit strategic to stay out of trouble. But I was horrified at my lack of awareness, despite trying to be strategic. So this was really crazy to me. So I really started to really work on awareness, and then this developed into strategy, and then from there it worked into the perception of the psychology of others. I wanted to understand others, so that because the more I understand others, the more I understand how the brain works, and awareness works, the more I understand me. And so I really took this very deeply to heart. And even to this day, I practice understand reading people, knowing people. Made a big study shortly after that. I said, I want to know people at the first glance. The very first meeting when I need them, read them. I want to be able to read them and know them. And I spent so much time, like when new kids would come to school, I would make my assessment of what I thought they were. And then I would spend like in the next couple of months getting to know them and check it back with my original assessment, because I didn't want to just assume and get caught in assumption traps. I was very, very cautious of assumption traps. So, I didn't know scientific method. It wasn't taught to me at school or anything at that point, at any rate. But this really intrigues me, and it brings up a bigger point. And I share this sometimes with people. Say, look, I came out of the box knowing some stuff. How? I don't know. But I knew scientific method right from get-go. That, in other words, that I could influence the results of a study with my own presupposed preconceptions and ideas and beliefs. So I was always very cautious of that. And again, you have to test and check. Like I could make an assumption, and if you don't like write it down and check it later on, you could have, confirmation bias, which I was acutely aware of too, where you get to know the person. Oh, well, I kind of always knew it. No, you didn't. You conforming the reality after the fact to make your initial assumption work for you. So I was very cautious of that. So I wanted to really get to know that. But this led me to an intense understanding of psychology. So, I don't like to put labels, but if I were to put a label, I would say I'm a psychologist, not a psychologist. That's somebody who practices psychology and typically of others. But a philosopher is one who creates philosophy, right? Well, I was a psychologist and still am. I created my own understanding of psychology because I had nothing to go by there. So, and now today I have a very extensive, detailed understanding of psychology, which comes from my own studies.
Yeah, it's
an
interesting thing you're saying, Syl. And look, I like myself personally, I can attest to a lot of what you're saying in the sense, if I try and bring back some of these explanation for people that may not be totally grasping everything you're saying. So from what I'm sort of saying, if I sort of put this, my whole branding's around this, right? The warrior by design, and my whole saying is explore, create, and be, right? So explore, create, and be. Now, the exploring part is the exploration, right? Getting to know, understand, looking into it. The creating part is when we have that awareness. We come to a point of we understand what we're exploring and we're experiencing. And then that's when that creating is be able to come in, where we have the awareness to be able to create what we want to create and to be able to have in our environment what we want to have in our environment, right? And then from that creating part, we allow ourselves to be that, right, and be comfortable in that, and that's where we can potentially, with the right awareness, find that perfection for ourselves individually, right? By designing.
Exactly. And this is really cool, because that create, when you think about it, really, that create, when you tie it to awareness, it comes through choice. So choice and awareness are actually synonyms. Most people don't realize this. What do you mean it's synonyms? Yeah, because if I don't have real choice, right? And I don't mean choice where, I'm being beaten and I've got to do stuff. That's not really choice. That's pressure, right? That's manipulation. That's force. If you're doing something because you have to, you're not actually freely choosing it. If you don't freely choose your choices, you're never going to develop real awareness. You're just going to be a robot. You're going to be a program, right? So awareness can only come through deliberate, conscious, free choice. That's your create part, right? The moment you choose, you also create. You create a choice line. You create a fork. You create a path, right? You create a diversion in your reality. You're now breaking away. This is your choice, your path. You're creating something new. Each choice creates something new. Yes?
Yeah, 100%. And even with
So
that
this is really
choice,
cool. And then the being. Okay.
no, I was just saying,
Go ahead.
even with that choice, you know, as we know from psychology, and we know from the scientific viewpoint, that always also creates new neural pathways in our brains and
Exactly.
and in
Exactly.
our you know,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Oh, you bring up a beautiful topic, and I want to come back to it in a moment. Just want to add one more thing in the last part of your B. For me, this is application. Yes, I have an extensive philosophy and psychology that underlies what I do. I truly can say I really have a deep expertise in the psychology of learning, personal learning, right? But that's beside the point. My entire program is all about application. The one quote I will say repeatedly, and you can ask any participant, without application, it's all meaningless. I repeat this over and over and over because I want none of that empty intellectualism. Please don't call me intellectual. That's like an insult as far as I'm concerned. Because to me, if you're just intellectualizing about stuff, you understand it, you know it, and you really do, but you're not necessarily applying it. It's all theory. Sorry, but it means absolute bugger all, and it's useless. You know, I saw this with my psychology professor, and I'm sorry, it's a bit of a cliche with him sometimes, but he was teaching and he really understood. He knew all about Freud and Jung and Rogers and, you know, all the guys, right? But his personal life was clearly in a mess. Him as an individual was a mess. Dude, you're teaching this stuff, but you clearly, obviously not applying it to yourself. We can any student here can clearly see you as a person are a mess. So what are you teaching me? I'm sorry, but I have no faith in what you say. If you can't demonstrate it by application, it's a waste of time. Now, that's not always the case. You know, there are some who can teach stuff who can't necessarily do it. But in general, the psychology wasn't geared to application. It was geared to understanding and also geared to the typical old school system of memory. Yeah? And that's useless to me. So in my programs, I don't care if you remember one thing at all. You've got to demonstrate your understanding. So two things in my program that are really very different is, so I have an online program, you go, you do the stuff, but then when you come on Zoom with me as the follow-up, you've got to do a repeat back and the takeaway of the online course. There's also tasks and exercises, but those two things, and there's something else, the dictionary of powers and other things, those two are very, very fundamental. Because the repeat back is, as you know, right? I'm assuming, you know, in military. So you have an officer and he says the thing to the troop, and he says, you understand? And the troop says, yes, yes, yes. And off the troop goes. And the officer hears the troop tell his mate what the officer just told him. And it's completely different. Yes? You see this all the time. So, you know, in real sophisticated military, you always repeat the orders back. Yes? Now, unfortunately, or in military, they have you repeat the order back sometimes if they really have their act together. But you can just say it like verbatim, you know, just repeat the words back. If you really want to make sure, like if I was in charge of like a special forces unit, I would insist that my troops explain back my orders and our business, our battle plan in their own words. Then I can see if they really understand the underlying conceptuality of it, the strategy of it, the logic behind it, right? For them to repeat my words, this is just parroting. This doesn't mean they actually understand. So the repeat back is a comprehension check, not a memory check. So this is really important. It has other benefits in this too, that you get to practice expressing yourself, which is huge for most people. They never get an opportunity to really express their deepness themselves. So it has a profound therapeutic effect just in that alone. Furthermore, when you express something that's inside your head, I understand it in my head and I call them shadow thoughts. The moment they come into the light, they freaking disappear. Boy, the moment I start to explain it, I thought I knew it, but the moment I realized, oh crap, I really don't. Right? So you get to hear yourself through the repeat back. This is huge. Yep. So that's only the start. Now we get to the takeaway. And the takeaway is, what do you take away from this? You might take away something completely different to what the session is all about, what the sharing, the point is all about, the logic and understanding the psychology, the philosophy, whatever, right? The application, the tool. It doesn't matter. I mean, I could put a hammer in your head, and what do I get from this? You could say, wow, you know what? This is a cool mechanism. This is a cool pry bar, which a hammer can be, right? It can be an excellent pry bar. I mean, when you remove nails, you use it as a pry bar. So somebody with a different perspective can see it not as a hammering instrument, but as a leveraging instrument, which it also is, right? If they only focus on the pronged part. I'm talking about typical claw hammer.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is really huge. So the takeaway is to say, what did you get out of it in value? And if, like when I listen to somebody, I always say, what did I take away from this? In other words, what am I going to take away that I can use?
Yeah.
So the takeaway gets you to conceptualize and to put into a useful tool something that you are going to go and use. And of course, then you've got to go and apply it. So, when we have the follow-ups, we always talk about, we call it name that app, name that application. How did you use these tools, these ideas? So this is really, really powerful. Now, plus part of the takeaway is I'm shortcutting, right? I'm condensing this whole philosophy of takeaway. It's a big deal. I got a whole session just on takeaway. But part of the takeaway is also to be aware that sometimes your takeaway can be completely out of the blue and disconnected. So I'm listening to you talk about hammers, and I ask you, what's your takeaway? I said, this reminded me of the time when I was, back in the 60s, or I don't know, back in the 80s, or I don't know, back in the 2000s, I suppose, when this and that. And it's like, it's just a random memory, but we explore those because those are in some way almost always connected, or there's a pertinence and relevance to them. And this is very valuable to explore. And when we go into that, it's like, wow, it doesn't matter. We are after value, not necessarily connected value. I don't care how we get to value, as long as we get to value. So a takeaway sometimes comes out of the blue, intuitively, randomly. It's fantastic. So this is very, very magical and powerful. And this is a really core central part of, how we get to that learning and growing. And so the other part here, sorry, you mentioned something really special to me. I don't want to forget, but go ahead. Say, I can hold my point. No.
No. You continue. We'll get to. I can comment. Yeah.
So all of my the psychology that I have is premised on one powerful concept. I mean, many, but one that I use repeatedly is emphasis. Right. So to understand emphasis. So the repeat back and the takeaway, it's all about emphasis. But emphasis alone is not enough. To really get value out of emphasis, it needs to be pertinent and relevant. So when you share the repeat back, yes, this is a comprehension check, but the takeaway is you sharing pertinence and relevance to you. In other words, it's a sharing of what was emphasized by you and for you inside your brain. Now, for those who don't understand the magic of emphasis or not aware of it, why we are so excited about it? Because emphasis literally rewires your brain.
Yeah.
Let me say that again. Emphasis literally rewires your brain. In other words, you get something emphasized. What happens? The node, the thing that's being emphasized, expands in your brain. Through that expansion of the node, through all the little tendrils and fibers and pathways where the neurons and things run across, it connects to other nodes. And those nodes now expand and connect to other nodes, and so on and so forth. And if this is actually a physical change in your brain, right? Physical change, literal rewiring of your brain. This is why we all remember where we were on some dramatic day, or when your baby was born, or when you first got laid, or 9/11 or stuff like this, right? Anything that's supremely emphasized, we tend to remember, right? PTSD. It's all about severe emphasis gets stuck. The brain gets stuck in that wiring of that traumatic event, which really is, we only think of it in terms of trauma, but it applies to any emphasis. The trauma is just emphasis, right? So understanding this, we can now understand that, hey, I better be careful with what I emphasize and where I place my attention. This is absolutely critically important. So as part of my study and understanding and my sharing and communication of awareness, we learn to be masters of our own emphasis and of our attention, so I don't inappropriately emphasize things I don't wish to emphasize. Yeah. So I don't make a big deal out of crap. Yeah. Plus, I understand de-emphasis. Now, most women really understand de-emphasis. Right. So you go to the party, or the gathering, you're hanging out, and there's this guy who's interested in you, right? And he comes across to you, and you just don't want to know nothing about him, right? And you say to him, look, bugger off, get lost. And some women get a bit rougher than that. And the more you tell him to get lost, you can tell him to F off or whatever, the more he keeps on coming back. Why? Because he's getting attention. So this is an emphasis. So the way to get rid of him is not to, because, to ignore somebody is actually a peculiar type of an emphasis. The way to get rid of him is not to even notice him, right? And when that girl or the woman doesn't even see the guy and he realizes she's not even noticed me, he's so de-emphasized, he doesn't actually exist. He's completely unimportant. This now becomes almost impossible for that guy to go and approach the woman. But the moment she starts pushing about him, there's a connectivity, there's a relationship, there's an interaction, right? Yeah. So most women understand this. I suppose if you've been that jackass guy, you understand it too. But it's really interesting, right? Yeah, exactly. But most people understand it because they've seen this in process. So de-emphasis is not paying attention at all. Now, if we truly get skilled at this, I can have this person literally next door to me and so de-emphasized that from their perspective, I'm not seeing them, but of course I am. It's so tiny in my brain, but there's no importance attached to it. So when it comes to dealing with things that are traumatic, it's not about ignoring or fixing or correcting. It's about de-emphasis. Now, one of the most powerful ways to de-emphasize is to replace. Very simple.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That's it. So in everything that I do, I don't fix your problems. I find a way to replace it with something that works for you, that's valuable for you, that's useful to you. An example I like to use here is you can teach your kids not to steal, and they can be successful in this, and you can be successful. And fine, you've got kids who don't steal. Does this mean your kids are automatically, necessarily kind and courteous and considerate? No. But teach your kids to be kind and courteous and considerate. How the hell are they going to steal? It's not possible, right?
Yeah.
So the positive takes care of the negative, but fixing the negative does not necessarily give you a positive. Yeah. So if you're in debt and you pay off your debts, that doesn't mean you're now suddenly wealthy. Yeah. So this is the problem with problem fixing. Plus, when you get to in the mindset of fixing your problems, think of the emphasis. You go to your shrink up or whatever, and you focus on your problems. What are you doing? You're emphasizing problems.
It. Yeah, exactly.
When I was a kid at school, in high school, this drove me nuts. When I, started to hear about psychotherapy, when I was in high school in the 70s, the late 70s, and they didn't get this. And I said, but how do you guys not realize you are making the problem worse? You are emphasizing problems, and the people just going to keep coming back to you, because the moment you get in that bubble of your problem, suddenly you see all the problems you didn't even know you had. And I see this with people doing that all the time, and it's really sad. Now, of course, it's really great for the psychotherapist. You keep on coming back. I don't know that they're doing it deliberately, but still, I thought it was a really sad failure to understand fundamental psychology. At that point, I understood attention, and that's what I called it, attention. I didn't realize emphasis was actually a physical, neurological thing. I only discovered this much later. I was very excited to discover it, but this is so powerful, and what you pay attention to, you bring more of into your life. Very powerful, very, very powerful.
Yeah, 100%. I think, if we look into that, so if I was to kind of break some of that down, and that's where all these sayings are out there, right? Where attention goes, energy flows. All these other things like rewriting our neural pathways, or re-recording, or getting to know ourselves in the sense of our true awareness, our environment, where we place ourselves, or what environment we put ourselves in is what we become. Who we surround ourselves with is who we become. All this sort of stuff. Now, if we look at all those concepts in that smaller, package, other than that sort of, great awareness around it, it'll like, why it might seem simplistic explanations, everything that we see, everything that we think, everything we believe, everything we perceive to be true will be true, regardless whether it factually is or not, regardless whether it's
a variable.
Yeah, that's right. Whether it's factually true or not, someone may say that's black and the other person says, well, that looks white to me, right? Now, if that person believes it's white, then that's white for them. If that person believes it's black, it's black for them. So, and this is why I kind of say about belief, right? I've said a little bit about it. There's three little letters in there, or three little letters in there when put together, LIE, that, allows us to, why we can believe something that can create something, right? Those beliefs can also be a lie, right? And to that point where it really gets to a point of understanding that when we can get true awareness about what we have around us, what we're putting in our brains, what we're believing, what we're perceiving, and all that sort of stuff allows us to be able to come to a point in our lives of these concepts you're talking about, right? Because that actual, we say where energy goes, and that action, we say action, and we say, but I actually like apply, right? Because apply is very different from an action. An action could be just doing something, right? But applying something is in the sense that you actually understand what you're doing. You actually understand what the action you're doing. It's intentional, and it's for a purpose.
Exactly. And this is being deliberate. That's why, the subtitle of my program is A Toolbox for Deliberate Living.
Yeah.
If you're just living haphazardly, it's okay, it can be. But when you live deliberately, that's when you add joy and power and magic and awesome. Do anything deliberately. I mean, I challenge people. I say, first I ask them, I say, please just, when they, like I used to do Airbnb experiences in my home, with COVID, I can't anymore. But I would have them just walk from one end of the room to the other. And then I say, now walk deliberately. Boy, that's a hell of a different deal to just kind of walk, in your normal thing, and then to walk deliberately. As a soldier, there's all sorts of different kinds of walks, right? Deliberate walks are a really powerful thing. So when you do stuff deliberately, you change your intent, your focus. When you see, for instance, you see the typical thing with special forces, they have that particular walk that they have. But that walk is a walk that not only puts you in a posture to use your tools effectively, it's also a walk which leverages your awareness and your attention, right?
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
When you're walking that, you're coming up on a mission, there's potential danger. It's a particular walk. But when you look at it from an intent point of view, that walk isn't just to put you in a place to use your weapon most effectively and to be able to react and respond. It's also a walk which leverages your awareness and your intent. Exactly. So it's a very specific thing. So when we understand the deliberation to be leverage, and a leverage that enhances you. Now, imagine if you live your entire life living deliberately, right? Because being on the battlefield, a lot of people get addicted to battle and warfare because you're really alive in those moments of battle. Yes.
Yeah, well, you're definitely in those moments
because you have to be hyper deliberate. Yes.
Yeah, and that's where people. No, I was just going to say that's where that people call there's a lot of explanations out there, intuition and this and that. But that hyper awareness allows us to come to a point of around be aware of ourselves on so many levels energetically. Not that you would intellectualize this with someone, but energetically, you're so aware, you're so in tune with your environment, everything around you, your senses. Yeah.
So one of the things that I do is, like, for instance, a soldier or just anybody, you're in the jungle, you're surviving, you're in the workplace, whatever. I actually bring to conscious awareness the things that you do intuitively and naturally, right? We are all geniuses at many things. For instance, we are all geniuses at implication. You're walking in the jungle, oh, what a lovely jungle, and it's going quiet, right? Now you're from the city, and you say, well, you don't even notice that it's gone quiet in the jungle because, well, you're not used to the rhythms and the pace of the jungle, right? So you just keep on working. Well, it's gone quiet. Why? Well, because the freaking tigers just arrived. But if you have that awareness, and you have an awareness and you understand the implication, that silence now suddenly has implication to it. It means there's some kind of a danger involved, right? Or you hear the birds giving you the warning or whatever. It's all about implication. In the context of jungle survival, we've been trained in implication. We understand that, hey, the rustle in the bush, that could be a bird or it could be a snake or a lion. So I steer wide around the bush. Okay, I may be wrong, but so what? Yeah. I'd rather be wrong and alive than, be arrogant and then be dead, right? So implication, we are geniuses at implication. We just need to learn to do it consciously. As I see it, intuition is so often just an implication chain that you are comprehending, compressed in time. You're getting that whole implication chain all in one moment. It's all there because you can take, especially with soldiers, right? You in that heightened awareness, they can put together things very, very quickly. And afterwards, when you do a debrief, you start to unpack that moment. And now it might take you half an hour to unpack all the things that went into that one momentary perception or decision. Yes?
Yeah.
We are geniuses at implication. So I'm just using implication here now to illustrate and share that what I do is unpack the mechanism, the tools of awareness, like understanding education, for instance, and anticipation, and also many of them. It's very powerful. It's very, very powerful when you can consciously and deliberately use the tools of awareness. It enhances you and empowers us. It's very, very, very awesome. Very cool.
And I think that's a cool
And
point you
living
make.
deliberately.
Yeah, I think that's a cool point you make, Syl, in the relation to, like, I can kind of speak to it from a point of view from that heightened awareness from, either like an athlete or someone who's so, someone who's so involved in what they do, they come to a point of heightened awareness, right? They come to that,
exactly.
Their every being, their every fiber is in that moment, in that expression, or in that, like if I kind of go through the brain of it, like, myself in a military sense, or even, from that understanding from a military sense in an athlete, in that second or split seconds, they're seeing the ball, the people, the crowd, the grass, interpreting the weather, that like all this sort of stuff is happening within a split second.
Time changes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when we understand that awareness is linked to time, much like gravity is linked to time. Yeah. So when we get this, it's all starts to work together. It's very, very, very cool. So one of the participants of my programs is, she was reading the biography of Einstein. This really grabbed her. She really thought it was very interesting. And so we started to get into quantum physics. And so now we're reading all about string theory, and I can connect this to wave impeccability. It's all connected when you start to look at it from these abstract conceptualities. It's very exciting, and it gives you an insight. So yes, heightened awareness, it's an emphasis of the brain and being in the zone. When you understand it via the lens of emphasis, by the way, it really helps, because in order to get back in the zone, you need to leverage the appropriate emphasis to get back into that particular brain that's been trained for that. It doesn't work under ordinary awareness. You have to kind of do the things to get there. So for writers, I really, I have to make a formal course out of it, but I've helped many people with writing. Because when you understand writing in this context, you see that, hey, all you got to do is give it an opportunity for you to get into that space. And a very simple thing that I tell them, writer's block, can solve it very easy. I tell them one simple thing. Rule number one of writing is to write ugly and then edit pretty. When you're writing ugly, anybody can write ugly, stupid crap. Actually, I challenge them to say, truly try deliberately to write really bad stuff. It's actually very hard to really try. I call it knucklehead poetry as an example. I said, please write knucklehead poetry. It's very difficult. But anyway, so when you're writing crap, it just flows. But your natural tendency is to improve. Once you get that flow going and you allow the brain to start working, it naturally starts to improve and write better. And then the story, one thing leads to another. There's implications and consequences. If you have your character do this well, there's a consequence. You ain't got to do anything else. Nothing is in isolation ever. But you got to get started. But they're all trying to write that first perfect sentence. That's not going to get you into your zone mode. Just start crap. You can always delete the beginning, right? But just start, right? Ugly, edit pretty. But it's about allowing the brain the opportunity to get into that brain that has been trained to be the writing brain. It's not the ordinary brain, it's a different brain. And this is very powerful with emphasis, to understand that I is more than one. We have many different I's in us, in other words. It's grammatically correct to say I is more than one. I call them aspects. We all know our, aspects like, Mr. Anal, Mr. Stubborn, Mr. Wise Guy, Mr. Party. We have many different aspects to us. And understand those are little sub-brains or sub-programs within the brain that acts as a brain when it gets involved with itself, right?
Yeah, 100%. We call it facades, we call it masks, we call it all these other things, the eyes and but you're dead right. Like I could quite easily, in the right environment or a certain environment, pull on one of those little brains, right? Like I've talked about before. I've been involved in bike clubs, military, whatever. If you're a plumber, you're at the pub, whatever the scenario is, you can always, you can always pull on that aspect of yourself to be able to change who you are.
And that's why I like to say it's an aspect, because what those are really, like, okay, take Mr. Stubborn, right? Or Mrs. Stubborn. At some point when you were a 2-year-old, you had great success with your psychology of being stubborn. It got you what you wanted, right? But then your parents got tired of it and they gave you some smacks and said, no, I'm sorry, this is not working. And then you gave up with this psychology. It doesn't work anymore. But for a while, it worked. Now, The brain doesn't throw away anything. And I call a part of our brain that kind of takes care of this the inner bureaucrats, right? Because they really are very bureaucratic. And their job is to essentially keep you alive and to save and sort and file everything. So if something has worked in the past, they cannot throw it away because that situation may recur, may repeat. So they bureaucrats, and it's like a computer. It doesn't have any sense. It's all just, technical. It has no way of knowing whether that situation cannot recur or not. It theoretically could. Well, therefore it keeps this. So that's why we hang on to some of those things. And even as adults, sometimes our stubbornness gets us what we want, right? Squeaky wheel gets the grease type of logic. So that's why those are aspects of us, parts of us. We can learn to use them positively. For instance, like stubborn and pride. Most people say, wow, that's not very cool aspects of me. How can I use this to be positive? Or ego. Well, I take stubborn pride in not having an ego. Holy crap. This really works very well for me personally. I got to tell you, this is a fantastic thing. I take stubborn pride. I use my stubbornness. I use my pride in not having an ego or being patient. I leverage them positively. You can use anything. It's how you use it, not the thing itself, right? So if you take stubborn pride in learning to be patient or learning to be disciplined or learning to be caring, considerate, thoughtful, strategic, whatever, right? This is really going to help you tremendously. So now I've turned stubbornness and pride from being negatives into positives. Yeah?
And the same could be said about ego, right? It's like if it's leveraged in the right way, like, because there is a very out there, there is this sort of perspective on,
Exactly. I have a great quote for you. And, part of my program is I have the participants learn to think in quotes, because when you start making your own quotes, not only do you start owning yourself, which is a very big part of the process, but you start to think a little differently, because a quote has kind of a style and a format to it. And, it's a way to fractalize, to conceptualize something that makes it usable and you can easily remember it, makes it mnemonic in other words. Right? So one of my favorite quotes is, ego is a tool. I love that. I love the double meaning of it, right? It's very cool. Very cool. So when you understand this about ego, you can use it positively or negatively, like any other tool. Anger, it's, as a warrior, sometimes you need that anger to save your life. Yeah, you're really tired and you get into a physical fight, and this guy, he's a little fresher than you, and his intent is to kill you. Well, I don't have the energy, but I get angry, and now I suddenly have the energy, right? So it can save your life, or whatever. There's many examples of negative things that can be used positively. I always tell this to mothers. I said, well, you're not a murderer, but if somebody's trying to murder your kids, you're going to kill them. Yes. Oh yeah. See.
And this is where that awesome word comes in, intent, right? It's our intent behind it.
Exactly. It is intent that determines the tool, and not the tool itself. Exactly. And when it comes to intent. So part of the program, the third key thing that I have participants do, the repeat backs, takeaways, and then they create a dictionary of power. Now, a dictionary of power is a very specific name, and it would be Jonathan's dictionary of power. It's not the way of impeccability or Syl's dictionary. I have my own, and yes, we have a community, but it's your dictionary of power. And what goes in here are concepts like patience, or like a strategy, or trusting without trusting, a little bit more complex conception. So these are the tools that you use in your daily thing. And why is it powerful? Because it leverages the power of language. We are extremely intimately linked to language. And when we understand the power and how language works, it helps us to learn a little bit quicker and easier. So when you put something into your language, it becomes part of your language, because you are a genuine person. You cannot go around using words that you don't understand. You'll feel like a fraud and a phony. So that's not going to work for you. Or if it's bullshit, you're also going to feel like a fraud and a phony, and it's still not going to work for you. But when you truly know it and understand its purpose, its point, its logic, and it resonates with you, and you feel it's important, and you using it because it's important to you, every time you use that conception, you reinforce it, you emphasize it, you make it more you. So this is a ridiculous, what's called the dictionary of power. It's a ridiculously powerful mechanism of organic automatic learning, right? So, most people see learning as work and memory. No, and what I do is there's none of that. People learn automatically, and it comes from inside. And after a while, they just say, wow, I just found myself doing this. Why? Because you truly truly get it, you've used it, you've understand it, you've made it your own, which is a very big part of it. And also you went and proved it yourself. Self-proof, it's another whole major conception. It's very important to prove it to yourself. Just take my word for it. The inner bureaucrats want to know. You might believe you can do this. You kind of tested and used it. We got to go and prove it. Anyway, so when we look at this, the conceptuality, and you really understand what you're doing, very powerful.
It's amazing stuff, mate. And if I was to, if you in 5 minutes, if you can, if we're talking to these guys, how can we get to a point in our awareness of being able to, be that, have that exploration with awareness, to be able to create what we want to do, to be what we want to be? How would you kind of, sum that up?
I love that. So the start of the program, and I said to you, intent is really first and foremost on the dictionary of power. So the very start of the program is clarity of intent. Yep. You need to have clarity of intent. The moment you have clarity of intent, everything starts to become pertinent and relevant relative to your intent. Yeah. So, like I'm after this wonderful girl and I'm just really head over heels in love with her. Everything starts to be relative to her, right? All my actions, it's about how I can connect with her. I can get, right? We all understand this, right? But when you really know what you're doing, everything starts to revolve around that. But if you're off in what you want to do, as in battle, like as warriors, if you're off in your intent, you can go haywire and really get yourself up the creek, right? This is a terrible thing. Plus, I make an actual distinction between intent and intention. Yeah, for me, intentions are kind of like wishes and hopes. And sure, I have good intentions, but what are you doing about it? Yeah, bugger all. Well, okay, so it doesn't mean much. But an intent is when you've actually invested and committed energy to it. Now, to say the 5 minutes, set your intent to deal with the most potent enemy we have, and that is habit. This is the enemy of awareness. Yeah, it's habit. So everything, we're in the habit of thinking in a particular way, conceiving of ourselves in a particular way, acting in a particular way. Start paying attention to your habits and your life will change just like that. You will suddenly become more aware. Now, don't just change your habits and replace them with other habits. Associate overview, perspective, strategy, awareness with your habits. So just practice changing your habits, like which way you stir your coffee or tie your shoelaces or whatever. Change those, but don't just change them for the sake of changing your habit. Change them for the purpose of when you change them, I'm changing my habit. Why am I changing my habit? Because I want to associate it with zooming out and being aware. Yeah? It's a very powerful mechanism. So there's obviously a lot more to this, but you asked for a short summary of what can I do to leverage my awareness? Be aware that your chief enemy as a spirit warrior, as a warrior, is habit.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much, Syl.
Habits of thinking, habits of assumption, habits of habit. Boy, you, as a hunter, right? As a hunter, how do you catch your prey? Know the habits.
So true.
So the thing that hunts us is unawareness. Look at any stupidity, any badness, any ridiculous, any screw up in your life. Why? Trace it back, unawareness. Yeah. So this is the thing that's hunting us. And the way it's going to catch you is through your habits, right? Yeah. I mean, a habit is by definition a behavior in which you can do without deliberate awareness. So a habit is in training, it's emphasizing unawareness. We don't want that. As a super warrior, hell no.
Right? Yeah. And Syl, I love that what you said, because that habitual behavior and and what you said in regards to like if we look at that on that border, you said how does a hunter catch their prey, or how does a sports team win against the other team, or how does a fighter win against a fighter, how's a swordsman win against a swordsman, whatever the scenario is, they learn their habitual habits of the other opponent, right? To be able to understand them, to be able to train themselves, to be able to work around what they see for the habitual behavior.
Exactly. Let me tie it up with one conception, the apex of all the conceptions. This is the concept of appropriateness. Now, I don't mean proper. Proper is something else entirely. Appropriateness is an absolute variable. What is appropriate on the battlefield is not appropriate in the bedroom, right? So appropriateness is having the awareness to understand what the context is and what my goal is, right? So my goal as a warrior is very different as my goal as a lover, right? So my behavior is appropriate relative to the circumstance and my goals. But all of this intent, habit, all is service, is there to serve you in order to be able to be appropriate. If I'm able to be appropriate in any circumstance, there you go. Game over. I've got what I want. I had somebody ask me who taught philosophy, and you'll say, hey, what is all this about? All the stuff that you share and all you do, your programs, all this about awareness. What I need awareness for? I'm quite happy being unaware. I to smoke myself up and get into a fog. And he's a very, very, very sharp guy, and very intellectual guy also, but also, he loves to go blotto. I said, the point of awareness is to enable you to be appropriate or to be more appropriate. Yeah. I said, that makes sense, right? So this is the power of awareness. The moment you have the ability to be appropriate in any circumstance, that's it. Game over, you've got it all. Right. So the ultimate warrior is always able to be appropriate. The ultimate anything, ultimate businessman, ultimate artist, you can be appropriate relative to your goals, relative to the context. So, and you need awareness to do that.
That's true adaptation, right? True adaptation. Yeah.
Exactly. So to when you are being appropriate, you need flexibility, fluidity, and adaptability. Exactly. Those are the tools of appropriateness. Absolutely. Yeah. But you also need awareness, you need discernment, you need understanding, you need anticipation, all sorts of things that come into your ability to be more aware. But the point of it is to be appropriate.
Yeah,
you can do that. Hey, just think about your feelings. If I can be appropriate with my feelings in any circumstance, I get to choose how I feel. I'm not feeling miserable because, well, the weather's bad. The hell with that. I'm going to feel great because I don't care what the weather is. I choose. So I can choose appropriate emotions. To me, the appropriate emotion is always joy and happiness and power and whatever, right? So
it's funny you bring that up, Syl, because that happened with me this morning. I woke up and it's raining and whatever, and I'm looking out the window and I'm going, why do we say it's miserable? It's beautiful.
Exactly. And look at that habit, right? This is a ridiculously influential habit. Yeah. The habit of we have our moods determined by externality.
Yeah.
So one of the things in habits that in part of the program that I have the participants do, I said, the first thing you do in the morning when you wake up, before you open your eyes, right? This is the very first thing when you come into consciousness, right? Most people think of waking up as opening your eyes. No, you wake up before you open your eyes, right? Typically.
You do.
Right? The very first thing you do is choose your mood.
Yeah, it's perfect. Love that.
Very powerful. Choose your mood. Now you're starting to practice the habit of being deliberate. And of course, the more you practice the habit of being deliberate, we are now going to leverage habit itself. Because when you're being deliberate, you're not really being conventionally habitual, right? But if you get into the habit of being deliberate, you're going to enhance your awareness like crazy. Not only that, but also when you start to deliberately choose your moods, acting deliberately, boy, this just changes your life just like that. Can you imagine choosing your moods rather than having your moods chosen for you? What power, what freedom, what awesomeness.
Yeah, I love this. I love this. Thanks, Syl.
I can talk about this all day, man, all day.
Mate, I think we're gonna have to have another conversation down the track.
Dolls, those Russian dolls. I'm like nested, man. There's always more with me. It's always more. Yeah.
Lots of layers. Yeah, no, beautiful, mate.
I got lots of levels. Yeah.
We're probably gonna have to wrap this up though for today. Can I ask? I'm just going to ask a final question that I kind of asked for everyone. It's a three-part question. So if you were to go back in time and spend 30 seconds with yourself, what wisdom would you share with yourself, your warrior within, to create your life by design? Also, at what age would that be and why?
I lived a very deliberate life from that time of age 10. So this is a question that I answered then. I asked myself then, and particularly in the context of time, I really thought about time and death. And my end result was, time is ridiculously precious. So I started living by the second. So the thing that maybe I would say to myself, and I'm not sure when, I would say, hey, trust yourself. Capital T trust. Now, capital T trust is not regular trust, because capital T trust is based on a foundation of impeccability. Yeah. So in other words, if I've done everything that I can do, I've been thorough, I've been scrupulous, I've been diligent, my conscience is clear, trust yourself. Yeah, this is very important. So, I had many, I basically limited myself because of too much modesty and too much humility. Now, I'm not saying be egotistical, but if you don't trust yourself, you are going to get screwed by inappropriate modesty and humility.
Yeah, so powerful.
Does that make sense?
Definitely. How can these
I
guys
had such a fear of being egotistical that I went overboard with being modest. And so I underappreciated myself, and therefore also didn't trust my own sensibility. It took me basically, much later in life to really realize that what I had, to truly appreciate and not realize. I realized it, but I didn't fully appreciate that, I had created this philosophy, this psychology, this way of living, these tools back when I was a kid. And I didn't trust it because, hey, I'm a kid. And what the hell do I know? But this is important. And, really understand. If you have kids out there, understand your kid is like a computer. Just because your computer comes without programs doesn't make it a crap computer.
No, that's right. It's still download.
Right? Exactly. The functionality of the computer is irrelevant. It's regardless of the programs. Yes, you can get value out of it, but you can load programs on any computer. Now, what you really want is a computer that will program itself. Yeah. So understand this with your kids. They're not stupid because they're ignorant.
No, definitely. That's amazing. I love that.
Two different things.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you're in any position where you're in authority over others, you're a teacher, you're a boss, you're a officer, understand that people aren't stupid because they're ignorant. Two different things.
Yeah, 100%. Where can these guys hit you up?
Say that again.
Where can these guys hit you up, mate, if they want to contact you or whatever?
The easiest way is just to connect with me on Facebook, Syl Sebastian on Facebook, or you can go to nobelia.org, and there's contact information on nobelia.org. And it's Nobelia. Yeah, Nobelia. Yeah, it's a planet, Nobelia, where noble people live. So I've got a whole book series about the new nobility, and that's where it comes from. I say it as a mnemonic, right? And now it makes sense because people ask me, what is Nobelia? What does it mean? It's the planet, the home planet of the new nobility. It's a magical book series of, the application of monist philosophy. Yes, it's set in the future and it's utopian, but nonetheless, it's a demonstration of the application of monist.
I love that, mate. That I love that. It's see what mine's Camelot, mate, in the round table, very similar. So yeah.
Exactly. And Camelot had perfect weather. People don't know this about Camelot, right? It only rained at night.
Sorry, can you repeat that actually?
I say Camelot, it only rained at night in Camelot. People don't know that about Camelot.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, only rained at night, had perfect weather. Oh yeah, it was an awesome place. It was more than just, a place where Arthur and his knights were. The place itself was awesome and had moreness to it. Like Nobelia.
I believe that. Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
I felt the link there. All right. Thanks a lot, mate. And
total pleasure. And anytime, anytime, I'm always up for being a guest. So
thank you.
Well, thank you for listening. If you found this episode valuable, please take the time to like, share, and subscribe. It really does make a difference. It helps others out there explore their warrior, create a life of choice by design, and be all that they wish to be. Remember, explore, create, and be.